Hey guys, and welcome back to another Warcraft lore video. This time it's going to be about the Vrykul. These guys are very Norse and actually one of my favourite races in the game. So yeah, I've actually been really looking forward to this one. And our pronunciation is probably a little bit of an issue, but I have consulted with a few people from Sweden that I know, especially with the pronunciation of King Yrmin. Honestly, I'm probably going to fuck it all up, so if you are from a Scandinavian country or somewhere like that, I'm sorry, but fuck it, let's actually get into the video. So first of all, these guys feature really heavily in Wrath of the Lich King, and that makes sense. They're in the northern continent and they have very heavy Norse themes, and really I feel that Blizzard did a great job at reinforcing it through the design of their characters, their settlements, and then also just the music of the zones that they're involved in. In terms of their culture, they are very, very brutal, and they just seem to be the kind of usual value-strength kind of deal. And they're often seen both riding giant dire wolves and proto-drakes, and then some of them in the Storm Peaks like to use polar bears as mounts. I'm personally going to go with the Storm Peaks people. In terms of magic, they practice this form of runic magic, which is apparently kind of alien to the mages that we were used to in most of Azeroth, so that's kind of interesting. Now, the Vrykul origins go back a very, very long time, in fact all the way back to the time when Azeroth was being ordered by the Titans. They are, as Bran's Broadsbeard tells us, one of the seed races of the planet, and that, of course, because of that, rather than evolving over time like many of the other races, they were created by the Titans in the same way that, say, the Earthen and the Mogu were. Like all of these original races, their purpose would have been to aid the Titans in ordering the planet, and that includes things like fighting the old gods and their minions, and then building things, basically a lot of the brunt work that had to be done. In terms of locations, they are mainly in the eastern half of Northrend, with a few of them hanging out at Icecrown. The main capital of their race seems to be Utgard Keep and its surrounding villages, and then in addition to the regular Vrykul that we see, there's actually a subrace called the Frost Vrykul, and they are primarily found in the Storm Peaks, and then some of the guys in the Storm Peaks, later on, due to Arthas and the Lich King, seem to have moved over to Icecrown Glacier. They have ice-covered skin and have a bit more of a bluish tint than the rest of them. So after the Titans left the world, they, like many of the other seed races, succumbed to the Curse of Flesh. The Curse of Flesh was basically the thing that turned the Earthen, who are more, I guess they're kind of made of stone or iron, that kind of thing, turned them into the fleshy beings that we know today. And the reason that Yogg-Saron did this is because he wanted them to be more easily infected and taken control of, and of course the weakness of the flesh. So that's how that happened. And really this brought about a lot of strife. Many of the Vrykul children were being born smaller and weaker than was normal, and eventually King Yrmin decreed that all of the weak children should be killed, and that was in order to keep the bloodlines pure. This did work for the most part actually, but some of the parents actually managed to sneak the children away, and this was so they could grow up far away from Northrend, and essentially be free of the infanticide that the king was trying to basically bring upon their entire nation. I'm not specifically sure if they were a nation, by the way, probably best just to say they were a bunch of clans who probably did have their fair bit of warring and sparring between them. But anyway, this did work for the most part. These parents stowed the children away, and it was kind of successful. A lot of kids escaped. And the shattering had not occurred at this point, so there was no sea to cross, which means that eventually these children would end up in what is now called the Arithai Highlands, and over time they would evolve into the humans, who would then band together to form tribes. Then there's the Kingdom of Arathor, and that spread across the Eastern Kingdoms to form the human civilization that we know today. Anyway, so a lot of time passed after Yrmin had done his children killing, that sort of thing, and really they seemed to be decently successful, and they kept up their warrior culture. But then shortly after the shattering, they retreated from their villages and went into hibernation. This definitely leads to speculation that the shattering greatly affected them. I think we still no proof of this because in a lot of their settlements you do see a lot of sleeping Vrykul. And also, a lot of them were still asleep when we arrived on the continent, so that definitely says that they only really recently started to wake up. Anyway, so for thousands of years, the vast majority successfully hibernated, and I don't really know exactly when they started to wake up, but what we do know is that eventually the Lich King would come into play, and after the events of Warcraft 3, and then Arthur's awakening from the Frozen Throne, they eventually did start to be woken up. King Yrmin cast aside their previous gods. He said that they had done nothing to prevent the Curse of Flesh that had afflicted their race and brought so much trouble on them. he pledged to the Lich King and basically said, "You are our god of death." After this alliance with the Lich King, a few different things happened, and honestly a few of these are probably nearly simultaneous, or at least had a large amount of overlap. So first of all, the Valkyr were created, and these were created out of certain females, presumably the most powerful and magically proficient. Those who were selected were from a village called Valkyr, so it definitely makes sense that that is how they got their name, of the Valkyr. Then they also set up tribes to become a member of the Yrmjar. Sorry, Scandinavians for the pronunciation. And these guys were an elite group of Frost Vrykul, and they would serve under the Lich King. They essentially were the cream of the crop, the best and most violent of the Vrykul. Now, to join one of these guys, you had to undergo the gladiatorial trials at Jotunheim, which again, sorry Scandinavians, they basically would go into a battle for ascendance, and this was fine for those who won. Those who won got to be Yrmjar, and they were very happy. Those who lost, however, were resurrected as the Vrykul. And the Vrykul are semi-mindless undead. They're not totally mindless, and some of them do seem to have elements of power within the Scourge, but really not that much, and definitely nowhere near that of the Yrmjar, who were far more powerful. And after the forces of the Alliance and the Horde landed on Northrend, we started to seriously mess things up for them. Shortly after we landed in the Howling Fjord, we were able to set up our main defences and forts, and then after that we managed to kill Queen Angerboda. A bit of a silly name, I think, but what this did is that it delayed the awakening of King Yrmin, and I'd imagine that this lack of leadership is probably one of the elements that allowed us to claim a number of early victories against the Vrykul, and that probably by the time that he was wakened in Utgard Pinnacle, things were just far too late. So then after that, after the fall of the main Vrykul in the Howling Fjord, now that we had taken care of the living Vrykul, we had to take care of a bunch of Vargul who were located in the Howling Fjord, and this was really fine. We killed their dragon, we killed a bunch of sleeping Vrykul, and all in all, things worked out quite well. Then these guys really don't feature until Icecrown and the Storm Peaks. Now in the Storm Peaks, things are a little bit more interesting. We sacked places like Valkyr, which is the birthplace of the Valkyr, and basically pushed the Lich King's Vrykul allies back into Icecrown. They had nowhere else. There was, of course, another group called the Hillendir, I think. Now, these guys are interesting, actually. They're a faction of female Vrykul who are rather similar to Amazonian warriors when you think about it. They hate men and they use them as slaves. They're also at war against the Sons of Hodir. This happened after the Watcher Thorm decided to attack them after the death of his wife, Sif. They have this notable ritual, which is kind of cool, called the Hilnsmeet, I think. And first of all, there's a duel to the death, followed by a larger duel to the death, followed by a mounted polar bear fight, and then finally a fight jumping from back to back of proto-drakes at the Temple of the Storms, and the victor gets to be the new wife of Thorm. These Vrykul do not serve the Lich King, and they actually hate those at Valkyr who do. So they're, you know what, they are independent, they don't need no man, and they're kind of interesting. But anyway, after we were done with the Storm Peaks, it was really just the Icecrown elements that were left. Now, a lot of these Icecrown guys were in the main settlement in the middle of the zone, and they were essentially just providing the main body of the Vrykul and Vargul army of the Lich King. Then there's also some guys that are Frost Vrykul that are sort of stuffed off at the side of Icecrown, and we killed their leader, a few other things, and really with all this, we essentially just destroyed their faction. In terms of lore, I know that it's only the first 5 minutes of this video's lore, but honestly, they're just kind of there as the Vikings to fit in the Viking expansion, so it's sort of hard to get a lot of lore out of them. Now, there are there's actually just two more groups to cover. First of all, we have the Iron Vrykul. Now, these are constructs, and they were made by one of the Titanic Watchers, Loken, and they basically serve as warriors in Ulduar to fight whoever the hell that they need to fight. They are not traditional Vrykul, they really just bear a resemblance with them. And then finally, we have the Cavaldir. Now, these guys are really interesting. They are Vrykul raiders who spent most of their time raiding the beaches of Northrend, basically similar to a lot of what we think about previous Vikings in our own time. They are able to summon Kraken as well. Now, this is kind of interesting, because the Kraken are creations of Neptulon, and this makes many people think that these guys are in fact allied with Neptulon, and this does make sense as they are found fighting the Naga in Vashir. Also, it does make sense in that we don't see these guys on the ground, so if they are in servitude to Neptulon, then maybe he bound them to the ocean. At least that would make kind of cool sounding lore. But anyway, that is really it for the Vrykul. It seems like some of the last ones that were left were the guys that we killed just before we fought Sindragosa in Icecrown Citadel. Now that's really it for the video, apart from one thing, the Valkyr. A lot of Undead players will be probably more familiar with these guys than the rest of us. But the Valkyr, after the fall of the Lich King, didn't have a master, and they probably would have just been put to death, or at least sort of chained in by the Bolvar Lich King. But actually what happened is that Sylvanas, Windrunner, cut a deal with them. Basically, the problem of the undead is, well, because they're undead, and perhaps certain bodily functions are no longer as, in as tip-top shape as they used to be, they can't have kids. Actually, that's probably a good thing. Undead kids would be kind of horrifying. But anyway, they can't have kids. They can't procreate, and they can't keep their race growing, which means that they would be doomed to extinction. Sylvanas recognized that this was a problem, and she basically cut a deal with these guys, and we don't really know what they're getting in return. But we do know that they're probably getting something, and that Sylvanas probably has some sort of nefarious plan going on. But essentially they now serve as, well, I guess it's kind of like the storks for the undead. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And one thing, actually, I started using a new cinematic kind of process for filming all the background footage, so do let me know if you enjoyed that. I think it's probably a bit better looking than the old stuff. And, yeah, that's really it. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.